Estamos em tela, Alceu.
Bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. I am Alceu Bittencourt, National President of ABES. It is a pleasure to be with you here today for our event to launch Brazil Water Week 2022. We're going to have a special session dedicated to the SDGs, SDG 6 specifically. But before we talk about Brazil Water Week, we are going to show you our video, our divulging video of Brazil Water Week. You can please.
Então, falando um pouquinho da Brasil.
So talking a little bit about Brazil Water Week 2022, it is going to be held in the last week of May from the 23rd to the 27th. And we're going to have at the ABES Connecta channel, before the actual week, we're going to have several special sessions. This is a first one. This is the launch. And there will be other sessions starting at the end of April, the weeks before Brazil Water Week. We will have some other special sessions. Brazil Water Week is an initiative to try to increase the channels of integration and knowledge for professionals who work with water and sanitation in Brazil with the international partners. So we're bringing capacity building, sharing of knowledge from other places around the world. And we also do the reverse channel. We can have more contact and we can divulge our practices, our reality to these same international partners from all over the world. Brazil Water Week started as Rio Water Week in the first edition in 2018. Then it has its second edition, Brazil Water Week. It was going to be an on-site event, just like Rio Water Week, but by then the pandemic had started. So we have had a fully online event in 2020, and we kept the same format this year. For those who participated and for those who didn't, it's an entire week program with several sessions, 100 parallel. Oh, there aren't any parallel sessions is what I meant. So people can watch all the sessions if they have the availability. And we will be working on a studio. We're going to use the branch that has just been remodeled, the new ABES branch. It was transformed in a studio for the program. So not only there will be the 4 daily sessions, panels, debates, we will also have sessions on the breaks as we did 2 years ago. So it is a continuous agenda trying to address matters of interest. There will also be videos, debates, people from ABES and their guests. Therefore, it's going to be a very intense program every day. Another important characteristic of Brazil Water Week, especially on the second edition, was an emphasis on building a collaboration with partner entities. I am the coordinator of Brazil Water Week, second edition, inspired in the process of the World Water Forum. We participated in building the Brazilian Forum a while before. So bringing this practice of, inviting institutions to help debate and design the sessions. That is very enriching and makes us think, just thinking about the sessions, we already have the contribution of international and national entities, such as the World Bank that today is with us, but several other banks as well, WA, other different entities and organization. It is a very enriching process. So this process was used in the second edition. Carlos Rosita was a coordinator. Now we have Marisa as a coordinator. Carlos also participating. There's an entire group involved with preparing the 7 themes that we have. So there are these groups with the participation of these organizations and entities thinking about the sessions. We hope that with that, we can have a very fruitful week, just like the 2 previous editions. So now talking a little bit about today's session, we chose and we keep on focusing SDG 6 as a reference theme for the week, because we understand it's a synthesis of several matters. There are 7 themes you saw in the video, the 7 themes, and then at the end we're going to play the video again. Each theme unfolds into several sessions. The first one is the one that more directly is related to the SDG 6, but the SDGs summarize all the efforts of improvement with the most important purpose, which is allow for people to have access to water, sanitation services in an appropriate manner, quality services. In Brazil, we have the new sanitation framework. The universalization has been a topic that has been very much addressed. So universalization is taking quality sanitation services to the entire population. So then you might ask, what is an appropriate service? What is a good service? And what is in fact universalization and meeting the SDG goals? And how do we measure that? Because there's a concept, but measuring it is not that simple. So how do we effectively prove that we are advancing in a way that is appropriate. This is the focus of today's session. We're going to have two presentations. One is from ABES, Sérgio Ayrimoraes, and he is going to talk about this matter of assessing and measuring SDGs in Brazil. Then we will have from the World Bank two people presenting, Midori Makino and Alexander Serrano, bringing an international view. Midori is going to focus more on the regional Latin American context, and Alexander will focus on a growing document from the World Bank regarding the importance of water, resilience, and hydric safety. So with that, we intend to bring a very broad panel for this kickoff, the kickoff of our week. I hope everybody gets encouraged to participate in the other open sessions that will happen towards the end of April and the weeks in May prior to Brazil Water Week. And I also encourage you to enroll for the week itself, that is from the 23rd to the 27th of May. So I'm now going to the first presentation, Sérgio Ayrimoraes. He is very renowned, very well known by all of us. He has an important track record when it comes to water resources and sanitation with ABES. And as I said, he is going to present the work that Ana has been doing, which is the monitoring, the tracking of SDGs in Brazil. Sérgio, thank you so much, and you now have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alceu. Good morning, everyone. Everyone who's here with us on YouTube, on the ABES channel on YouTube. First, I would like to thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to participate in this kickoff, as Alceu very well defined, of our Brazil Water Week in its third edition. And I'd also like to thank and congratulate ABES for maintaining SDG 6 as a reference theme, as very well mentioned. Presenting the overview of SDG 6 in Brazil allows us to summarize all the issues, or at least the main ones, that are related to water resources and sanitation in the country. So now I'm going to share my screen. I'd ask the organization to say okay if you can all see my presentation so that I can move forward. Yes, it's okay. Great. Okay, so the idea here is to give you an overview of the SDG 6 indicators in Brazil as a kickoff for our Brazil Water Week. And to start this overview, it's important for us to understand what is SDG 6. And SDG 6 is the water agenda, a global water agenda for 2030. It's important to remember that in this agenda for 2030, there are 17 sustainable goals that have been agreed by the member states of the UN, 17 goals. Among them, number 6 is the one that addresses the matters related to water resources, sanitation, sewerage, sanitation as we understand it in Brazil. And when it comes to SDG 6, there are 8 goals that have to be met so that we can advance in this theme until 2030. It's important that the 17 goals, as well as the 8 objectives that are related to SDG 6, are here in this integrated circular form. And I have these gears here for a reason, because we have to understand that these themes are all interconnected. When we're talking about SDG 6, we're talking about water, sanitation, but we're also talking about ending poverty. We're talking about health. We are also talking about education, which is SDG 4, reducing inequalities, which is SDG 10. So there is a set of interconnected goals, such as the 8 goals of SDG 6 itself, in which we address specific matters in our sanitation sector, such as access to fresh water and sewerage for everybody. But we also deal with matters related to integrated management of water resources, quality of the water, a rational use or an efficient use of the water. Therefore, we need to have the systemic vision of the 2030 agenda, specifically the SDG 6, so that we can make this path and have this overview for the entire country. And for us to have this overview and be able to bring information about this overview, it's important for us to have a monitoring as well as a continuous assessment of the indicators. The 8 goals related to SDG 6, they have a set of indicators that have a standardized methodology to allow comparison between the different countries. And this methodology and this monitoring has been done by the National Water Agency in the last years. So in 2019, with a previous study, we launched and disclosed an initial report that brought ANA's view regarding the SDG 6 indicators in Brazil. This report was released in 2019 with versions in English as well as in Spanish. And now in 2022, recently launched in the World Water Forum, we updated the information on a second edition of this report dedicated to SDG 6 in Brazil. This relationship there with Brazil Water Week, it's important to mention that the first time that we presented these indicators, almost as a spoiler, it was in 2018 in Rio Water Week, the first edition that was mentioned previously by Alceu. We had the launch of the consolidated version in 2019. The SDG 6 agenda was discussed in Brazil Water Week in a session organized in Brazil Water Week 2020. And now in 2022, once again, we have the opportunity of bringing the theme, and coincidentally, in the launch of the second edition, we have the opportunity of once again bringing the agenda in the opening of the 2022 edition of Brazil Water Week. Now, looking at the 8 goals, the first of them has to do with drinking water, fresh water for everyone. That's the 6.1 goal. This graph is by region. You can notice that very close to 100% of access to freshwater services. We have more than 5 million people, 2.6% of our population, that still does not have access to freshwater services managed in a safe way in Brazil, and these are data from 2019. But what we can also see in this graph, important matters to be debated, to be addressed, especially considering Brazil Water Week, which are the regional inequalities. If we take a look at this historical series, we can notice that the North and Northeast region, there is an advance from 2006 to 2019, but there's still a gap if compared to south, southeast, and the Midwest area of the country. It is also important to mention some of the indicators that will be presented, especially the ones that are more known. Sometimes they are slightly different from the official indicator or from the number that we're used to in our national system of sanitation information is NIS, but this is also a result of the needs that we have of adapting the information, the Brazilian information, to the standardized methodology of monitoring the SDG goals. So the message is pretty much the same, but in some aspects and some indicators, the numbers might be slightly different. Another important aspect to mention is that we're here talking about access, several times understood as the coverage of the services, water supply. It is important to mention that this access disregards, in this specific indicator, matters of being intermittent and also water quality. Another aspect that I like to mention and link to the 7 themes mentioned in the video and also mentioned by Alceu, that fresh water for all is the first theme that is addressed on Brazil Water Week that talks about water, sanitation, and health for all. There's a direct relationship of the SDG 6 with Brazil Water Week. If we're talking about fresh water, if we're talking about being intermittent, we are necessarily talking about water security. And here, for us to have this overview of Brazil, a recent result that was disclosed by ANA is the water safety supply to take into consideration matters related to coverage, to access to the services of water supply. And we have a coverage as seen previously that is good in the country. 77% of our cities have over 90% coverage. But adding to this indicator, relationship, things related to vulnerable springs. 42% of our cities need to amplify their water production. And another important matter that completes this overview of water safety, 54% of our cities has inefficiency management, has losses. And that's a second theme that will be addressed in Brazil Water Week, which is managing the losses and also energy efficiency. The integration of all these themes brings this overview of urban supply. Almost 1/3 of our population, 27%, has a water safety that is minimum or low. 42% has a medium. 31% of our population that we can consider, if we take into account water production as well as water distribution and loss management with a high water security. So this is also a relevant theme that completes the overview of water supply in the country. 6.2 addresses sanitation and sewerage. So now the situation is not as comfortable when if compared to water supply. We have almost 60 million people that do not have access to sewerage in Brazil. There is an evolution if we look at the track record, but there's also a very interesting regional diversity, but revealing through this indicator the liability from the point of sanitation, the liability we have to face in the country. With an additional detail, we're talking about access to sewerage, and just recalling that a little bit less than 60% of the sewer generated in the country has treatment. So a little bit above average if we have as a reference the year of 2019. When we're talking about sewerage treatment, I am here bringing information from ANA that were recently updated to this 2019 as a base year. We have a little bit less than 4,000 sewerage treatment centers. Significant number. What draws our attention is the concentration of these stations. Only in 2007 cities, we have 5,000, more than 5,000 cities. So that means that only a little bit more than 30% of the cities have these treatment centers. That is the size of the liability, and it's important for us to deal with this liability, for us to have planning. We need to have regulation, and we need to have funding, especially when it comes to this bottleneck of sewerage treatment. Planning, regulation, and funding are two other sessions that are also addressed at Brazil Water Week that will happen on the last week of May.
And within this planning for the treatment of sewage, it is important to consider again our great regional diversity, where we have some places in the country with these great areas in the map where I have a lot of water and little sewage, so I can then use solutions that are conventional. But there are other regions in the country, whether because of density of population or because of very low availability of water, like in the semi-arid region in the country, where I have a lot of sewage and little or no water. So I need to use solutions that are a little bit more sophisticated. I need to use, for example, the reuse of water. And I would like to highlight uh, that we are going to have a session about circular economy. And one of the great themes to be debated is actually the reuse, which is so important to be debated in our country. Now, following with our agenda for ODS 6, specifically the goal 6.3, we have the quality of water issue, and these indicators that measure the quality of the water of the country, is 6.3.2, where we have information for both the groundwater as well as no groundwater in a partnership, so that we can have this data, the partnership with CPRM. And I would like to also mention some of the info that we have of quality of water, which requires monitoring. And this info, with all the overview about the water resources, are included in the report together with the water resources in Brazil. It's a report that is made available in its last edition in the end of 2021 and consolidated now in March of 2022, where it has a differential, which is a completely digital format, also very interactive, that can be accessed by this website that you can see on the slide. And that allows to navigate maps like this one here. This map is of our monitoring for quality of water map, and in the slide you can see a still format, but when you access the site you can access each year, you can interact with the map. And I would like to invite everybody that is watching us to navigate this website, because you will find both information about the quality of water as well as quantity or the management of water and the oversight of the water management in the country. The goal 6.4 is different from 6.3. 6.3 is about the quality of water. 6.4 is about the efficient use of the water. And in this relation between productivity of different water sectors, and with the indicator 6.4.2, with the evolution of the water stressed level. And here we have a graphic with a track record, with a history of the data. The data are updated in different water regions of the country. And one of the regions stand out due to the high level of water stress, which is basically the Atlantic, Eastern, Northeast Atlantic. So just so you have an idea where it is, I have the map of the security water plan for the country. And we see this region of the Northeast, which is our region that is exactly the one that I mentioned, the Eastern Atlantic Northeast region, with the lowest level of water security, coinciding with the information that we have consolidated in this indicator of ODS 6 that shows the level of water stress. So in our map, the more the darker the color, the less is the level of water security, and that reflects in the efficient use of water. In these regions, we estimate that more than 500 billion Brazilian reais of industrial production might be at risk in terms of economical uh, losses related to water deficits due to this low level of water security. So it is very important to think about the use of water, the water security that has to be debated, that has to be discussed in the country so that we can have an advancement in the sense of the necessary measures to make the situation more adequate and having different uses of water based on water security for the development of the country. So now, still talking about indicators, and I'm heading towards the end of this presentation, we have the goal 6.5, which addresses the integrated management of the water resources. And I would like to mention as well two complementary uh, uh, two extra goals that are 6.A, which is international cooperation, and 6B, which is the local community participation. And it stands out here that this theme is related to one of the central themes of Brazil Water Week, which is the expansion of the international cooperation and the capacity building, which is one of the 7 themes of our event. So we have, in one hand, to measure the integrated management of the water resources, we have some advancements if we consider the history. Here I'm measuring the level of implementation of the management in different um, ways, like the management, the instruments implementation, participative format, and the available resources to the management. So Brazil has been advancing in this indicator, and it goes from a level that is 44.2 out of 100 in 2010, going to 2020 above 60, almost 63.1. And this goal 6.1 also addresses some agreements uh, about our basins that we have. Here, just as an illustration, I bring our basins, the main basins that we have in the borders. Here, for example, on the Amazon, and here for the Prato Basin. We are here receptors of the waters from the Amazon Basin. We donate water in the case of the Prado Basin. And in an analog way, the aquifers in the borders are also present. The most famous one is Guarani in the region that you can see here. So we have the cooperation operational agreements where we have 62% of our areas of basins and aquifers that are encompassed by these cooperation agreements. Both the cooperation and capacity building are the international cooperation and capacity building are themes, one of the 7 themes to be addressed in Brazil Water Week. So now, finishing the 8 sets, 8 goals, we have the alteration of the water ecosystems as well. So we have here the most recent data of 21% of the Brazilian basins have been through intense alterations in the last 5 years. And here I would like to highlight the losses in rivers and lakes. And these alterations in the environment is related to the climate issue. And I would also like to focus, finishing our 7 themes in its relations with ODS, highlighting the climate agenda. We have a central topic, which is environment and climate change and sustainability. And also, again, bringing data here from presented recently in Conjuntura in its digital format. And these are data that show different scenarios for climate change and its impacts in the water balance. in one hand, alterations in the offer, where we have some regions where I have a reduction of this offer in one of these scenarios that is above 50%, and here it's concentrated in the semi-arid region in Brazil. This is one of the scenarios, and it's the same one where we have an increase in demand. Here we have a different map on the right that shows the regions where I have, due to climate change, less rain, more evaporation that I have. Here I have a demand, an impact in the demand of use of water for irrigation. So putting numbers in this debate about climate change, about water balance, and to assess the effects and the impacts of these different scenarios in the actions, whether in the sanitation department or the water management area, is fundamental so that we can have a debate in the country about water security and guaranteeing at the end that we can reach the goals agreed upon in the Agenda 2030 related to ODS number 6. All the information, just to finalize here, about water, about sanitation, about the indicators of the ODS 6, they are available in our portal of the SNIRH, which is our national system for information about water resources. We have a panel for water, depending on your interest about what kind of service you're looking for. One of the tabs that we have here is a panel of indicators, and one of them is precisely the indicators of ODS 6 that has been recently reformulated based on the data of the second edition of ODS 6, as I previously mentioned. So this was launched recently in the 9th World Water Forum that took place in Dakar, with the indicators ODS 6 panel available both in Portuguese as well as in English. Okay, that was the overview that I had to share about ODS 6 in Brazil, the relation of all its goals with the exceptions and with the sessions and the themes to be addressed that will take place at the end of May in Brazil Water Week. So I would like to thank again the opportunity, and I am available for later on for a debate about everything that's been said. Thank you so much, Sérgio. It was an excellent overview about the situation that we have in Brazil about water resources. And it is always a privilege to have Sérgio with us because, he is, we have this reference with a personal trajectory of work focused specifically on the development of the studies that sustain this vigorous collection of data really well put here. And that is really important to us as a country to have this reference. So it's really great. Thank you so much. You did a better job than I did. So to all our participants, you have provided what Brazil Water Week will actually approach and address. So you did a good job, a very important role that you're playing. And I think that out of your presentation, I would like to highlight something that I like to focus on. We do have problems and we do have some important deficits, but we have advanced also a lot in many different things that we've done. And as we advance to solve the problems that we still have, it is important not to lose sight of what has been achieved already. So we have to be careful because, as we advance, we cannot lose the advancements, the achievements that we've had in the past. So now let's proceed to the second presentation. And I talked about one of our partner entities. So we had a visit with the new person in charge for water in Latin America, David Tro, together with our colleague Juliana Carnito would visit ABES so that we can support Brazil Water Week, besides other cooperations with ABES. So it's great to see that the World Bank is also together with us in this effort. So now we are going to have a presentation made by Makino, our colleague, who is a leader in sanitation for the global practice of water. She will focus more on a panel of SDGs in Latin America, and then she's going to address the initiatives of LATAM for the World Bank about water security, as well as transformation of residue into resources. And he will speak about a very recent document from the World Bank about the theme of the importance of water and the need of resilience building. And I think that we are going to add to the vision that we have. So he's going to join our panel. So I would like to invite Alex and Midori. So Midori, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would like to share my screen. Can you see my presentation now? Okay, so I will, great, thank you. So I would like to start now. So hello, everybody. As introduced, I'm Midori Makino. I'm here from the World Bank, and I'm very happy to participate in this launch event for the very important event, Brazil Water Week. I would like to provide some perspectives from the global view on SDGs and the progress achieved to date. I will then hand over to Alex, who will talk more about our recent analytical work on the regional water security. Water touches every aspect of development, and it links with almost every sustainable development goal, as also mentioned by Sérgio earlier. Water drives economic growth, supports healthy ecosystems, and is also essential for life itself. I would like to share with you here an infographic that from a recent study that the World Bank carried out on water and human capital. Evidence shows that hand washing alone could lead to 40% drop in diarrheal diseases and infant mortality. And declines in open defecation reduces stunting, access to clean water increases school attendance of girls, and improves academic achievement of children. And all these events contribute to the socioeconomic development for life. To give an example of water's impact on economy, according to the public expenditure review for Brazil that we recently carried out, the economy of Brazil may have lost close to $1.3 billion in productivity due to diseases from unimproved water and sanitation in 2019. This is based on an estimate using the global burden of disease data. And a combination of 10% increase in water supply investments and efficiency in improvement of the way the public expenditure is done could lead to an increment in GDP of between 0.3 and 0.7%. As presented by Sérgio, SDG was adopted in 2015 by all United Nations member states in the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the SDG 6 comprises of 8 targets and 11 indicators. I'll be focusing on the 6.1 and 6.2, how these have been how the global achievement has been. Despite progress over the past few decades, one in three people still don't have access to safe drinking water, and 2 out of 5 people don't have access to hand washing facility with soap and water, and more than 673 million people still practice open defecation in the world. And we only have 8 years left until the deadline of the 2030 goal. This slide shows that the world is not on track to achieve the SDGs, especially the targets 6.1 and 6.2, achieving universal coverage. This goal by 2030 will require quadrupling of current rates of progress. The lower income countries have the furthest to go, and it will be especially challenging to accelerate the progress in fragile and conflict-affected countries. The way people access water is categorized into 5 tiers of access, and you can see here it's color-coded. The SDG 6 aims for everyone to have access to safely managed drinking water, which means improved water source, such as piped, borehole, or protected wells. And this has to be on promise or near one's home, with water availability, throughout the day, and also has to be free from contamination. This is the quality indicator. This slide shows how access to safely managed drinking water has been increasing steadily over the past 2 decades. But for many low and middle income countries, the priority remains expanding access to basic water service, which means that it may not be the water access may not be on the house premise, or the quality is not guaranteed. Safely managed water is a very demanding indicator. It's a standard that goes beyond the Millennium Development Goals that were set earlier, prior to the SDG. And even for countries with high access, disparity exists between urban and rural areas. No one left behind is fundamental premise of the SDG, but in reality, that's not the case. Because it would depend, the access would depend on where people live and what income they have. So this slide shows the disparity between the access between the urban and rural areas. So people access sanitation also. This is the SDG goal 6.2. In diverse ways as well. And these are categorized also here into color-coded categories for access. However, the percentage of people with access to sanitation is much lower, and the progress is much slower. So despite the gains, more than half of the world's population lack access to safely managed sanitation. And this means that improved facility means the one designed to hygienically separate excreta from human contact, such as a flush toilet connected to sewer, septic tank, or pit latrines, which is not shared with other households. Household wealth is an important determinant of access to sanitation services. People from poorest households generally have the least access to sanitation service, and access to at least basic sanitation service varies widely across countries. I just wanted to also illustrate an inequity perspective from a recent public expenditure review we did and benefit incident analysis we conducted, which showed a substantial error of inclusion and substantial error of exclusion, even for the tariffs and subsidies. So this basically showed that the share of people with access to water in the urban areas did not pay for the, who didn't pay for the service was higher than those in the rural areas. And the same goes to the people who were in the wealthier decile, didn't pay for water and compared to the poorest. So it was that inequity showed in our recent study as well. So you may recall from our recent experience with the pandemic that hand hygiene has been at the heart of the campaign to reduce COVID-19 and other infectious diseases also. But only 60% of the world's population has access to basic hand washing facilities. Unlike access to water and sanitation, there are large differences in access to hand washing facilities across income levels. So my part of the presentation concludes here, and I would like to hand over to my colleague, Alex Serrano, who will present the key challenges of meeting the SDG goals and what can be done differently to tackle them. And he'll be using the findings from our regional report on water security that he led, and it was published recently. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks a lot, Midori. Can you go to the next slide? So thanks everyone for this invite. I'm gonna draw a little bit on the study that Midori just mentioned, which is titled Why Water Matters for Latin America. And basically what it describes, it's 6 challenges that we have been facing in LAC to achieve green, resilient, inclusive, and a water secure world. Basically, the first one is water governance gaps. The second one is infrastructure and financing. The third one is how do we manage water resources? Then how do we increase water productivity and its efficiency? And how do we control water pollution and then deal with climate change and resilience? Next slide, please. Thank you, Midori. Next, yes.
I'm having difficulty here for some reason. Oh, here it is.
So thanks. So one of the first issues that we face is that many cities are having insufficient water supply systems. They have old networks, they have lack of capacity and storage, and this is becoming very vulnerable to variations in water availability. As you can see in the graph, dam storage in Latin America is not that large, with the exception, of course, of Brazil, that has a strong dam capacity and a strong storage capacity to face this vulnerability and to face also the natural variations of water. Next slide, please. If we go then into the financing of water, you can see that the region is off track in achieving SDG 6.1 and 6.2, since the annual investments that are needed to close the WASH access are estimated in $14 billion per year. If we wanted to increase the financing rhythm and we wanted to bring in more resources, we also would need to bring in more funding from the private sector, as you can see in the next slide. As you can see, for the average period of 2008 and 2015, the average spending of the private in water is around 0.1% of GDP. This is still a very small share of the spending that is required for water and sanitation, and as mentioned in the previous slide, needs to be improved in order to meet the requirements that are growing every year. Next slide, please. Another important point, and this work was done together with CIWI, where they focused their efforts on how to improve public participation, how to improve governance gaps, how to improve transparency, is the lack of financial resources to support the participation of users, particularly in rural, indigenous, and Afro-descendant communities. If you see in the map, there are very few countries that have in their legal framework the procedures and standards to allow for the participation of small communities, of traditional communities in the management of water and in the management of water resources. Next. If we go now and talk a little bit on the implementation of water resources management principles, we can see the LAC is the region that is lagging behind for the implementation of integrated water resource management. So why is this happening? We're going to talk a little bit of this in the how do we overcome these challenges, but we believe that there has been an effort to perform wide reforms of integrated water resource management that sometimes are too wide to be implemented in an efficient manner by the governments of the different countries that want to embrace integrated water resources management. And I'm going to talk a little bit of this in the next slides. Next, please. When we talk about climate variability and climate change, we can see that in LAC, we already have around 150 million people that are living in high water scarce areas. Flooding is affecting more than 1.8 million people every year across the region. And then if we take a look at the dry and wet scenarios, you can see that droughts are actually the impacts that are causing, the events that are causing more impacts in the region. This is also linked to the insufficient monitoring and forecasting capability, together with sometimes even non-existing coping mechanisms to deal with droughts and floods across the countries in LAC. Next. When we talk about water quality and pollution, we can have these large numbers that you might be aware of, where 25% of LAC rivers, lakes, and aquifers are affected by severe pathogens and pollutions from municipal use, industry, mining, and agricultural discharges. And then if you look at the water quality in the aquifers, you can see that between 40 and 60% of the water from aquifers is becoming increasingly polluted from untreated wastewater and urban drainage. Next slide. When we talk about water productivity, you can also see that LAC has the largest water productivity gap for most crops due to low irrigation efficiencies and the lack of drainage networks. When we talk about irrigation, remember that we have to talk about how do we use water, but then also about how do we drain water out of the fields. Additionally, when we look at the irrigation infrastructure, you can see that aging infrastructure and dam safety issues can limit the potential that we have for agriculture, but also for hydroelectric development. Next slide. Well, what are the key constraints in our views that are needed to be, what do we have to overcome to bridge these challenges? The first one is managing water resources. As I mentioned, LAC is the worst performing region with respect to implementation of integrated water resource management, and very little progress has been made. When we talk about delivering water services, we see that utilities are facing operational financial challenges that result in high operational and maintenance costs and greater consumption levels and water losses. When we talk about mitigating related climate and water risks, we have to talk about how do we monitor and forecast these risks, and also how do we deal with the implementation of coping mechanisms in specific to deal with droughts. Next slide, please. So what can be done differently? The first thing is that we need to modify how do we think about implementing integrated water resources management. As I mentioned before, sometimes we want to take the whole piece of the cake and try everything for integrated water resource management. So we try to have a law change, an institutional change, river basin management authorities, and sometimes we see that those transformational reforms at country level can become cumbersome and difficult to implement. So what we're proposing is to try to tailor the strategy to advance in integrated water resources management to each country, and then promote the creation, which is the second point, of basic water resource management tools and institutions where they're needed. If we want to do the whole thing and the whole principles about integrated water resource management, sometimes we just get stuck, or countries get stuck in the transformational and reform process. Another thing that has to do with with one of the latest points is how do we strategize the enforcement of river basin and groundwater institutions? We have several clients that set out targets of creating 20 river basin councils or creating 20 groundwater institutions. But then if we prioritize and try to deal with the river basins that are facing the most pressing issues and try to deal with the aquifers that are facing the most pressing issues at first, then we're going to have success and we're going to have momentum into the implementation of integrated water resources management. The other thing that we need to think when we are dealing with water resources management is how do we modernize the institutions and the tools to incorporate resilience within the river basin planning, resilience also within water rights allocations, resilience also with concessions and permits for building water resource management infrastructure. The other thing is that when we embark in reforms, and this is particularly important when we're dealing with legal reforms, is to think about how we're going to incorporate technical autonomy, accountability, and transparency in the process of institution making, but also in the process of legal reform making. What we have seen also during the analysis that we presented in the study is that sometimes legal or institutional reforms, they come without funding, without transparency principles, and then without autonomy, precisely for the institutions that are responsible either for water resources management, but also it happens in water supply and sanitation. If we don't think about how these reforms on paper are going to translate into factual reforms, then the process also becomes difficult to implement and difficult to achieve the overall integrated water resource management that we want to set as a goal as part of the SDGs. The final point, which is important in water resource management, thanks Midori, is how do we improve transboundary water cooperation? Sometimes LAC is perceived as a continent where we don't have a lot of transboundary river basins or a lot of transboundary rivers, but it is happening already that countries are facing diplomatic challenges or even conflicts around water allocation and around water pollution between neighboring countries. So that's an agenda that we believe it's important to complement and to push forward in Latin America. Next slide. Regarding water services, our 6 takeaways and recommendations on how to change things, to improve resilience and improve water security are the following. The first one is to provide adequate incentives at the utility level to have more predictable funds for expenditure. The analysis that we have carried out shows that sometimes utilities are finding it hard to finance long-term infrastructure investments since the public funds that they're receiving are not reliable. No? So they cannot commit funding for more than 4, usually what government is lasting, or 6 years. And that becomes a little bit unpredictable, and then it impacts on the way expenditure is done. The other thing is how do we promote corporate governance and then strengthen the capacity of the regulatory bodies? We have also found that some of the countries in LAC, they don't even have regulatory bodies for WSS, and that the corporate governance within utilities is still linked to political factors and still linked or not linked to technical, to technical indicators, so to speak. The other thing that is lacking across the region is the need to boost investment in rural areas, focusing on marginalized groups. And we're talking here about indigenous population and Afro-descendants. The other thing is how do we incorporate affordability criteria in urban sanitation? And then how do we promote digitalization tools and circular economy principles for water supply, but also and particularly for sanitation? The final point on water services is the need to increase productivity. And this comes through the improvement of irrigation practices, but not irrigation practices as a standalone analysis, but also irrigation practices that come through an hydrological study that takes into account the river basin availability and also the downstream users that sometimes are affected when you increase efficiency in irrigation in the upstream part of the river. Next one. Finally, how do we improve the mitigation of risks? The first thing, and I think I already talked about this, is to improve the real-time hydrological information systems, so the weather forecast and the early warning systems. We know that there has been a lot of advance in this area. We know that countries are working on this, but I think the pace needs to be a little bit faster. The second point is to expand on green infrastructure in a sustainable way, which incorporates nature as part of the solution, as part of the management of water resources, but also as part of service delivery. Incorporated also inundation mapping and flooding in risk zoning in dense populated areas, develop the drought monitor that also comes with the information that is needed to mitigate and manage risks, and also to increase water storage to maximize the use of natural buffers. When we're talking about storage, we're not only talking about dams, we're also talking about natural storage, and also talking about the capacity of aquifers to act as natural buffers in case of droughts or in case of variations in the hydrological cycle. The point that is missing a lot is the knowledge of groundwater resources. And this has to do with my previous point on how do we use natural, as a groundwater as a natural buffer. That part needs also to be incorporated into river basin planning and also incorporated in how do we manage the different sources of water for the services that we want to provide. The final point, and that's a little bit of concerns in the study that we did. We found that most of the dams are already in an aging state and needs to be renovated, and we have to make a large push for dam safety. Is how do we convince governments to invest in dam renovation and climate proofing for the existing reservoir infrastructure. And I think that's my last slide. I welcome all to take a look at the report. It's a very dense report with a lot of interesting information, and we expand on these recommendations that I just mentioned and with examples of how this can be implemented. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Alex. Muito obrigado, Midori.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Midori. We had a very intense panel with a lot of matters being addressed, a lot of very thought-provoking topics were brought up, and let's see if we can still debate the graphs that Midori shared called my attention for the difference between the blue and yellow points, the population that has an appropriate service and the population that has a very basic level of service. Certainly, all over the world, poverty is an issue, lack of income, when we have that in Brazil for sure. And it needs to be included in the conversation, because that's one of the things that it's going to be the hardest to solve, the places that have the lowest incomes. Alex showed work that seems very interesting that is being presented. Several matters drew my attention. Several of them are very important in Brazil. Integrated systems. We have a hydric framework that is being discussed. It was proposed without much previous discussion, but it's something that will produce changes. Public financing. We cannot trust only in private funding. And the other thing that unfortunately we have been discussing very much recently are the disasters due to flooding and the landslides, flooding maps, mapping, risk mapping. Now I'm going to go to the Q&A.
Duas perguntas da Eliana Kitahara, que é a nossa conselheira, membro do
I have
conselho.
two questions from Eliana. The two are related, so I'm going to read one after the other, and this is for Sérgio.
Ela fala assim, dentro da ODS 6, quais as diretrizes, e só um pouquinho, retorno, quais as diretrizes da ANA
What would be the guidelines from ANA for the isolated communities in the rural areas, the traditional ones such as quilombolas and indigenous quilombos. So she wants to know the guidelines and considerations from Anna in these areas. I remember Alex showed a map of Latin America with countries that do have policies for the operation of systems for isolated communities, with yellow, those that do not have it, and blue, those that have it. So this is the question that shows that the question is based on Alex's presentation. So that's not exactly what the discussion we have about monitoring, but we have one that is more direct about what we are talking about today, also from Eliana, and she's saying that when we talk about Brazilian waters, we have data that encompasses the rural areas as well as urban areas, isolated or not. So, Sérgio, I would like you to please answer. Thank you for the questions. So they are actually related, and it's always a challenge to address rural populations or communities that are more isolated. So just highlighting some aspects from the point of view of the water management, Ana has a behavior that is related to our water resources. They have a basin plan as the agenda for discussion and reference to carry out actions in the realm of each basin. And this debate, based on the scale that it has, it ends up trying to address both in the discussion process with interaction as well as in the engagement after the actions that happen in consequence of this process. So they're always trying to find actions that are more specific to deal with the communities, with the rural areas that were mentioned. From the point of view of the guidelines, reference guidelines, we have an agenda of regulations that is defined already, that is public already, that addresses a set of themes that will be some related to the reference guidelines. One of the themes that is also one of the themes for Brazil Water Week, and then discussion related to the thing we're talking about universalization. I'm not creating distinction between rural or urban, big centers or isolated communities. This is going to be a debate that involves necessarily all the population. And yes, we do have to have a specific concern, a specific attention, so that these guidelines and now creating a link between the guidelines with the 2030 agenda mentioned by Midori and Alex, the objective is not to leave anyone behind. So not leaving anyone behind means that I have to have an emphasis not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural areas, thinking about the policy as a whole. Now, closing the two questions, when it comes to the conjuntura, conjuntura has a great number of data and info. So the intention, I mean, first of all, it's conjuntura has a national approach, so it's not a document from the government, but it encompasses the whole country. We have a network of partners that allows us to systematize the data. So it's data not only from ANA, but from partners, including the government, but not only. So we have data from the states as well. And then a great part of the information covers the whole territory, regardless of speaking of an urban or rural area. But now the concern, is very pertinent. And I think that we have to raise this alert this morning for our debate in the event. Okay, it's just a spoiler. I know that there are some specific sessions dedicated to this issue, which is the concern specifically about these communities, so that we can meet in a successful way the reduction of inequality, having management that is better done for regions and communities that are less favored in this sense. Okay, Sergio. Eliana has one more question. She says the following: the World Bank carried out some studies for shared management models for sanitation in rural areas and considered the CISA model as a good solution. So why not do have this public policy in Brazil? And as Sergio said, we will have a session in Brazil Water Week specifically about rural sanitation for isolated communities. So CISA system will be once again presented and debated in one of the events of ABES. So this is a spoiler or a teaser, okay, so that people can deepen in the discussion during our 6th week. Now there is one more question.
I will ask Midori to also comment on this, having a world view. And it has to do, and I've already made some reference to it, of the capacity of paying. In other words, affordability. Victor Queiroz is asking this question. He says, in the 6.1 text, they mention affordability. And so the question, is this somehow incorporated, considering the Brazilian tendency of having an increase of private initiative? That would be key. Sérgio, would you like to comment? Yes, thank you, Alceu. Thank you, Victor. It's a very pertinent comment. And in fact, first I will treat a methodological matter, and then I'm going to dive into the core of the matter. If we look at the SDG 6 goals, and he mentioned affordability, but the goals are even broader and more accurate. They address, for instance, hygiene. They address, for instance, the gender matter when you think of more specific topics. So the goals, they are a lot broader, and this is a methodological matter, then we can measure by the standardized indicators. This is something that we have to keep an eye on. Several times we reflect an indicator, and talking about water supply in the country, it's an indicator that gives you a feeling of almost being there, from a standpoint of a high level of coverage and access to a great deal of our population, but it ends up disguising some of the other matters that are backstage on the theme mentioned by Victor, which is, I have coverage, but am I in fact guaranteeing access, guaranteeing a capability of paying, water quality? Am I actually guaranteeing a reduction of inequalities? Am I actually guaranteeing tariffs? So there is a set of matters that are expressed, that are in the agenda, in the 2030 agenda. They are there in the goals, but not necessarily can they be captured in a more wholesome way in the indicators. From the public policy standpoint, the responsibility of ANA and the policies with water resources as well as sanitation is to be attentive to these matters, so that indicators are a reference, but what I have to pursue is the actual goal, with all its matters, as very well posed by Victor. Thank you, Sérgio. Midori, would you like to make any comments on the affordability aspect from the world view standpoint? How does a bank see that?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I would like to give a few points here related to the affordability question, which is a very good question. First of all, the literature shows, and our experience also shows, that the poor people are already, paying more for water, especially if they're not connected to the networks that have access to the formal services. So it's while you talk about affordability issues, they are willing to pay for that service, that good quality service. So the first step is really to get them connected, get that access out to the unserved population. That's the first. The second is the regulatory environment is very important. And I understand in Brazil, you have the new law and the regulatory framework is going to be strengthened, at all levels, at the government levels. So that is really going to help because it's also the tariffs, how the tariffs are structured, how the subsidies are being allocated. These are the questions that could be answered through that environment. And third, it's now that we have also the enhanced private sector involvement and the importance of having that contract for the service, I think it's a great opportunity to include in those performance contracts by the service providers to connect, to extend the services to the poor, and for that part, to be included in the overall financial and economic analysis, so that there could be some benefits of cross-subsidization within and also across the different user groups, and that type of upfront planning on how to ensure that the poor can be connected and at an affordable cost is the key. Thank you.
Obrigado, Midori.
Thank you, Midori.
Muito interessante.
Very interesting. Your comments are very interesting. Yes, people are willing to pay for a good service. That is a very important remark. And the comment on having good contracts. On this point, I just like to build up on that and reaffirm something that ABES has been insistently saying, which was our tender process with emphasis on grants of resources taken from sanitation. It's a lot more important to direct the resources and bind them to the sector. This is a very Brazilian debate or discussion, better said, but just building up on what Midori said. I am now going to give the floor to Alex. There's a question, Alex, about good practices. The World Bank is known for making an effort to divulge good practices. So the question is precisely about that. Maria Bernadette Guimarães asks, there are good practices that are very positive, but that haven't been too disclosed, contributing to amplifying storage, quality of water, and preservation of green areas. How to disclose more? How to divulge more? Alex?
Thanks a lot. Well, that's a good question, and I think it's within our strategy to get our products, our knowledge products out there and to showcase them with our client countries. We have a few reports. We have a report on storage, then we have a report on circular economy for sanitation, and then this report that tries to bring all different pieces together. We definitely need to advocate more. We definitely need to do more South-South exchange. We definitely need to do more outreaching. And I think also we need to modernize our communication strategy. I mean, people are no longer reading 200-page reports. They're looking at Instagram and using Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. So that's another game changing for us. We definitely are willing to share what we have as reports goes so far, but we are having with Midori push this year to have more of these best practices, more of these examples out there, reaching out to our clients and reaching out to the community that's interested in making this happen. That's my thing. Thanks.
Obrigado, Alex. Eu queria fazer mais
Thank you, Alex. I'd like to ask another question to you. So you presented several interesting matters from the report on the final slides. Just those slides could be an entire week of discussions, another Brazil Water Week, just to discuss those diagnoses and recommendations. But as I said, we are in a moment of discussing also management of water resources in Brazil with the new water framework that was presented to the Congress. And we participated in this process. Sérgio knows it well, the entire story. Brazil built an integrated management system for water resources, active basin committees in the country, on the level of different levels of government. A lot has moved forward. There's also criticism that the system it's a huge structure, but doesn't reach all of the goals. I don't know if you have specific knowledge regarding Brazil, so I'm going to ask a question, but an evaluation of Latin America, the continent, from what I understood in the document, advancing less in the integrated system, right? So can you see Brazil in relation to Latin America? Could you make a comment on this specifically?
Thanks for the question. And that's actually the one of the key findings of our report. And I'm not familiar with the Brazilian system and with the reforms that are taking place in Brazil, so I'm not gonna directly comment on that. But what we found, and this is also from the experience of the bank implemented water resources management project across the region, and not only financing project, but also technical assistance, knowledge services to the different countries, we found that sometimes countries are taking the whole problem of integrated water resources, implementing integrated water resources management in a very transformational and broad way. And that at the end comes with challenges in the implementation. Yeah. So when you want to change the law, change the institution, implement river basin councils, implement river basin organizations, then you're faced with a whole table of implementation challenges in the country, in the river basins, with public participation, with stakeholder participation. And sometimes governments get overwhelmed with the amount of things that they have to do to make this work and make this happen. So that's why we are promoting in this document to streamline the implementation of integrated water resources management and to go basin by basin and prioritizing the interventions that you're going to do based on how much you're going to get back from the investments that you're going to do in water resources management, but at a local level. Let's say that your government are feeling the pain of a river basin that is facing drought and is creating conflicts for agriculture, hydropower, cities. Then you implement integrated water resources management in that river basin first, because otherwise you get politically dismotivated and then you get your political capital exhausted if you're going to do 20 river basin councils and 20 integrated water resources management plans. And people say, like, I'm not seeing results. That same comment you made is across the region. It's like, I'm not seeing results of integrated water resources management. And we believe because the focus needs to be tailor-made to specific problems, to specific solutions, and from there build on the national and institutional reform. But that's the new strategy that we are thinking. Thanks for the question.
Obrigado, Alex. O Sérgio,
thank you, Alex. Sérgio is a specialist in the topic, so we'd like to ask him to also make a comment about it. Well, thanks for calling me a specialist, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the end of his comment, Alex's reflection. What do we foresee as a way to advance and reaching results? and I'm going to address it in a wide way from the perspective of the planning. When we talk about integrated management, and there are many challenges that we have in this area, but the key so that we can advance, and I'm speaking specifically about our country, Brazil. It seems to me, based on all the actions that are taking place, that we have a focus in uh, governance and the delivery of this management, because sometimes we see integrated as a need to do everything and solve everything. And then we end up not being able to direct the actions specifically for water resources management. So it is really important. And we have different policies, but I have to have a focus on governability and the governance of the water resources in the system. And I'm talking about policies of water resources. And we also have to have an interface with the sector policies, including sanitation. So it's no good trying to solve the issues of the sectorial policies within this framework that I call integrated management. So I end up falling into a such big complexity that generates a lack of results and actions. So I believe that, as you mentioned, Alceu, at the beginning, we've advanced a lot. I think that we have to look back and see how much progress we've made in this integrated management, but so that we can advance even more and have more efficacy in reaching results, we have to have this focus. We have to understand what is the agenda for water resources management and how it has to create a dialogue with other specific agendas to each sector related to water, not only sanitation, but generation of energy, irrigation, industries of different areas, all of them that are related somehow to the use of water, the use of water being one of their issues and references. So I think that we have to focus on everything. Looking ahead, I think that we have to focus on governability and also the management of water resources, which is the key so that we can advance even more. We've done a lot, but we can still do more. Thank you, Sergio. We are heading towards the end of the session, but we still have some questions and comments. Here we have a question from a international participant. So we have Brazilians in the audience, but also people from other countries. So Milena Dubio, she made a comment about the studies of the impacts per industrial sector. And she says that she understands that different methodologies, case by case methodologies, should be applied based on regulations. I think it's a comment, and I just wanted to share that. There's a question now from Jackson Alves, which is interesting, and I would like to ask Midori to make a comment about it. And the question is, when it comes to penalties for environmental pollution, I'm thinking maybe only companies can be fined or the population has its responsibility as well. So now we're talking about issues that are related to policies. Evidently, the population has responsibility. As citizens, we have a responsibility as well. And the issues related to water and sanitation are public issues that depend on the public management. So that is something that we have to keep in mind, regardless of who is going to execute a task. The public management is really important, and the responsibility is also public. So, Midori, could you please help us, heading towards the end of the session? I would like you to please make a comment about the public policies and the responsibilities that citizens have that need to be highlighted always and promoted as well. And how do you see as someone with a technical profile and as a citizen as well?
Thank you very much for the comment, which is quite critical because Water is, it's a public good, social good, economic good. It's all of the above. It is a very limited resource, which is declining in terms of the level of availability. So that is everybody's business. But what's important is for the government and the policymakers to really communicate this importance of the public policies related to water to the public, and to have that citizens' participation to raise the awareness. What's important is to really get that buy-in from all stakeholders. So it's not the citizens, it's all of them. It could be the industries, it could be the local governments, it could be the civil society groups, private sector. What's really important is, even in the case of Brazil, when we had the sanitation policy that was recently approved, how that is translated into what it means for the different sector stakeholders. That's communication and consultation in disseminating that law. That, for example, that is the critical. So that is my view, how important it is to have a clear communication strategy to really involve everybody, not just the policymakers, citizens, everybody in between as well. So that would be my comment on this. Thank you.
Obrigado, Midori. Eu agradeço pela sua participação.
Thank you, Midori. I would like to thank you for your participation. You've always collaborated with us in different events, and I do hope that you will be present in the coming months. Sergio, I'm gonna pass the floor to you so that you can do the closing of the session, please. Thank you, Alceu. I will, first of all, I would like to thank again the opportunity, and I would like to use two key words in the closing of the session, words that were used by all of us, and I do believe they are important so that we can have, the conclusion of what we talked about today. First of all is communication, and I go back to the beginning of the presentation where we have the second edition of our report, like the SDG number 6 in Brazil, with the intention of being able to communicate, to do a systematic follow-up of indicators, because it alone is not enough if it is not widely disseminated in a way that is very accessible and possible to be understood by the biggest number possible of actors in the society as a whole, so that everybody can monitor. And we hope that this communication also, based on the comprehension of the theme, the comprehension of the water and sanitation, we can have the adequate participation, the needed participation, so that we can reach all the advancements that have been mentioned. The debate about the implementation of the legal framework for sanitation has been mentioned here, the discussion of the advancement in the national water resources policy, the participation in the debate about the new water resource framework that is also critical, the participation in the event in Brazil Water Week that wants to meet the role that we have of communicating, as well as allowing the debate and the participation from communities, not only in Brazil, but international communities as well, so that we can debate such relevant themes, and that symbolically today were represented by the SDG 6 agenda. So once again, I would like to thank the opportunity, and I'm available for further debates or questions so that we can reach our goals, both in the country as well as internationally speaking, because it's an international debate and this international cooperation from other countries. So thank you so much also. Thank you, Sergio. So I'd like to thank you very much for all the support you've been providing for the preparation of Brazilian Water Week. So I'm gonna pass the floor to Alex so that he can, finalize his comments.
Nothing much to add. Thanks again, Sergio. I think the reflection of Sergio is right on track. That it's, as you mentioned also, Alceu, there's a lot of things to be done. The three last slides have a wide agenda for work, and just stay with us. We will share all the information that we have, and just that we are working together with you in achieving the same goal. So thanks a lot again.
Obrigado, Alex. Então, partindo pro.
Thank you, Alex. So now, the closing of the session, I would like to thank again our three guests, Sérgio Ayrimoraes, a specialist in the National Agency of Water and Basic Sanitation, Midori Makino, a specialist leader in the water and sanitation for the global practice of water, and also Alexander Serrano, who is a leader of the Latin American initiatives at the World Bank in terms of resources and residue and resources. So I would like to thank you all that followed this, that watched the session. I would like to thank the coordination of Guimarães for the BWW and all the people, the various people that are working together with us with the preparation of the themes, of the many themes, many institutions related to ABES and many of our partners. So thank you so much for the effort in the short period that we've had to prepare it. We're still not in normal conditions, but I think the pandemic is beginning to fade. So I think we'll be able to have good results for our BWW. The video of today's session will be made available for whoever wants to watch it and share. And on the website from ABES, ABES will also make it possible for you to access to the whole program of our webinars. As I said previously, we have many open sessions, special sessions that will be included in the preparation of BWW per se, which is from the 23rd to the 27th of May, with an exclusive and interactive platform. And on the website, you can enroll, and it is in the chat of the session. So you can check the website in the chat. So we also have a site for special sessions, and that is going to happen between April and May, is also in the chat for those who want to enroll. So we always like to reiterate the invitation for Brazilian professionals that are not members of ABES. We'd like to invite them to become members. There is a link also in the chat, so that link that shows you how to do that. I would like to thank all that participated in the session, that stayed with us up to now, and please stay tuned to check the ABES Connect program and also Brazil Water Week. So thank you so much and have